Part 5 of Mitt and Minn. If you remember from part 4, it ends with Mitt and Minn being trapped in a cave with a new friend that they have found, Tavi, the brown bat, and they are wondering, are they ever going to get out of this cave? Okay, so chapter 13. Before Mitt could say anything, Tavi asked them if they knew of the piazza. And this is a picture of the piazza. Mitt answered no. Minn shook her head. Neither Mitt nor Minn was in the mood for a tale, but neither wanted to be rude to Tavi after he had saved them from a hungry skunk. You see, long ago there was a horrible creature that lived in Illinois. It was larger than a bear, and part bird and part dragon. It had long wings covered in scales and a tail that whipped back and forth with a sharp end to it. It had eyes full of flames, sharp teeth, and 2 horns. It was called the piazza. Mitt and Minn leaned in. Minn looked over her shoulder to make sure nothing was lurking there. Tavi continued. The piazza was horrible and mean and liked to frighten every creature in its path, even humans. One day a great chief had enough of piazza, so he set a trap for it. He called for 20 braves with arrows to come along with him and wait in hiding in the bluffs above the river. Mitt thought about that. He had seen the bluffs and the river, so he knew the story must be true. The chief was very brave. He stepped out into the open and called for the piazza to come and get him. When the piazza came flying his way, the braves jumped out from the bluffs and shot arrow up to his wings. The piazza screamed loudly and flew away. Most think the piazza did not live. Then Tavi leaned in and whispered, I think it's still out there. I've seen it. Okay, so I had you look up for today the hodag, okay, because we have a legend in Wisconsin, not far from here in Rhinelander, called the hodag. So I just took a look at the Illinois legend that they are talking about here, and I found an image. Okay, and this is what the piazza is supposed to look like. And they also, it's in the town of Elton, Illinois, which is just north of St. Louis. St. Louis, even though it's in Missouri, St. Louis is a border city. Okay, it's in Missouri, but it's on the border of Illinois. So this Alton, Illinois is just north on the Mississippi River in Illinois. And they also have, like, their high school mascot is the piazza. I don't know if I'm saying that right or not, but that's their mascot. So I just think it's so cool that Illinois has a legend similar to like what we have a legend here in Wisconsin about the hodag. So let's keep reading. I'm back to the book. So Tavi has just leaned in and said, I think it's still out there. I've seen it. Oh, Tavi! A scolding voice echoed from behind. What in the world are you doing? It was Tavi's mother. She looked just like Tavi, but was much bigger and heavier. She looked at Mitt and Minn with kindness. Then she gave Tavi a stern face. Tavi, you can't keep telling mice that you are rescuing them from a skunk just so you can bring them back here to tell them stories all night. She looked at the mice and said, Don't believe a word he says. And she flew away. Mitt and Minn were a little cross with Tavi for making them believe that they were almost eaten by a skunk, but now they didn't know whether or not there really was a piazza. Tavi was on the ledge, folded up as small as he could make himself. He was ashamed he had tricked them into thinking that they were almost eaten by a skunk just so he could impress them. He hoped his new friends wouldn't think less of him. Minn understood how Tavi was feeling. Mitt noticed it too and spoke up. Tavi, will you let us tell you a story?" Tavi was happy that the mice were not angry with him. So there in the darkness, upon a cool, flat ledge in a cave, Mitt told Tavi the whole story of his journey from start to end. Minn tried hard not to cry, but hearing the story all over again made her feel even more eager to get to Chicago. Tavi wanted to make up for tricking them. He wanted to show them that he truly was a helpful creature. Quickly, he grabbed Mitt and Minn by their tails and carried them out of the cave and into the night sky, winging his way southward along the river. It was not easy. Tavi worked hard to fly and keep hold of their tails at the same time, and he flew through the night sky. And as they flew through the night sky, they passed a cliff. And so here is Tavi. It's an illustration of him carrying Mitt and Minn. And they flew through the night sky, and there they passed a cliff. And there it was. On the side of the cliff was a creature, half bird, half dragon. It was an image of the piazza, and it looked just like Tavi had described. Minn closed her eyes, and Mitt began to gasp. Tavi flew as fast as he could. Perhaps, thought Mitt, the legend was true. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter. And I have one other image I want to show you, because what they were talking about in the book is this painting that they have along on a cliff in that Alton, Illinois. Someone has painted a picture of the piazza on the side of a cliff. So you can see how this is similar to Mitt and Minn's Wisconsin Cheese Jamboree, how they went through Wisconsin and told different things about Wisconsin. Here they're telling different things about Illinois. Okay, chapter 14, Chicago. And here is the illustration so you can see Tavi continuing to carry Mitt and Minn on their journey back to Chicago. Okay, chapter 14, Chicago. Tavi worked hard to bring the pair into the Shawnee National Wilderness. It was almost morning by the time he got there. Because it was nearly light, he dropped them upon a forest road, knowing there would be bikers from Chicago riding along the dirt road, and that with them Mitt and Minn would find their way to the city. So this is a popular road, fourth graders, that people would take biking. They're probably like similar to like our bike paths that we have here in Wausau, the bike trails. So they have this bike trail near this Alton, Illinois, or I'm sorry, near this Shawnee National Wilderness. So they're telling more about Illinois. Okay, back to the book. The bat left quickly, and before Mitt and Minn knew what was happening, a large group of bikers came whirring toward them, dust spitting out from under their tires. Mitt and Minn would never have time to scramble out of the way. The tires were narrowly missing Mitt and Minn, who were separated in the crush of bikes. One bike went over Mitt's tail, injuring him and pinning him to the ground for a moment. Minn tried to rush to his side, but there were too many bicycles rushing by. "Mitt!" cried Minn. "Mitt, where are you?" Mitt did not answer. Minn hollered again. "Mitt, where are you?" There was still no answer. It was quiet now, and the riders had passed. All that remained was a cloud of dust, which was slowly starting to settle toward the ground. Minn kept calling, but even so, there was no answer from Mitt. Minn began to weep as she sat in the middle of the trail. She didn't notice the riders who had come up from behind her. They were two children, a boy and a girl. "Oh, look," said the girl, a mouse. It's hurt. It's not moving." With that, the little girl picked up Minn and put her in her bike basket. Minn was so stunned she could barely move. She had to find Mitt. She couldn't leave without him. But the girl rode away, taking Minn with her. Just then Mitt began to call, "Minn! Minn!" It was a quiet call from Mitt, who was stunned and resting in the ditch not far from where Minn had been. He had been tossed into the ditch by the wheel of the bike, and it took him several minutes to regain his breath. "Minn!" he called again, in the sharp way that a hurt, frightened mouse will call. "Minn! Where are you?" But there was no answer. Mitt called for his sister again, but no matter how many times he called and cried out to her, there was still no answer. Mitt crawled out to the roadside, nursing his injured tail. He looked from left to right. There were no bikes. There was no dust. There was no more Minn. Mitt had not heard the young girl and boy who came behind the other riders. He did not know that Minn had been picked up and carried away. He thought Minn had been crushed in the pack of bicycles. So he went back to the ditch and he began to cry. What would he tell Gertie? He thought. And then Mitt's thoughts went a bit deeper. What would he tell his parents? Meanwhile, the young girl and boy caught up with their parents and packed their bikes to start for home. The girl had already made a bed for Minn in an old cooler they had brought along with them. She put holes in the cover and grasses in the bottom. Although it was a comfortable place to be, Minn did not like being caged in such a manner. The sunlight was fading as the family traveled north in their car. At the same time, the sun was beginning to set in the forest. Mitt found refuge in a rotted stump not far from the edge of the road. The sounds of the white-tailed deer starting to browse in the forest shrubs and the footsteps of wild turkeys foraging in the understory soothed Mitt into a very deep and dreamless sleep. The family kept driving through the night until they reached their home. That's when Minn heard one word she had been waiting to hear for a very long time. "Okay, kids, we're back home in Chicago." "Chicago," thought Minn. "I'm in Chicago." Minn could not believe her ears. "Chicago," she thought. "I'm here?" But her happiness quickly turned to tears when she thought about being in Chicago without Mitt. This is not the way it was supposed to be. This is not the way the story should end. I will find our parents. I know I will. Chapter 15. It's titled Trula, but this is the illustration at the start of the chapter, so that kind of gives you an idea about what might happen in this chapter. Chapter 15, Trula. When Mitt awoke the next morning, a rush of sadness overcame him. Minn is gone. I am alone. I must make it to Chicago no matter what, he thought. I will find our parents and tell them all about her. Mitt remembered how Gertie was so selfless in letting Minn go along with him. He remembered how Gertie wanted Minn to go back home with her and live happily in Eli. He remembered how Gertie pointed to the words on the poster at the cheese jamboree. All heart, do try. So if you remember, at the end of the Wisconsin Cheese Jamboree, Minn finds Gertie, and then they want to all go home, but then they find out that their parents were actually known by Lilka, the cow. So that's all changes. So at the end of the Wisconsin Cheese Jamboree, Gertie and Minn are reunited, but then Minn decides to go with Mitt so that she can find her parents, and Gertie lets her do that. So that's what Mitt is remembering right now. And that is when Mitt found his courage. All heart, do try. I have to try, thought Mitt. I can't give up now. Minn is gone for good, but I will make her proud. Mitt raced out of the stump and began to make his way through the forest. He knew of the dangers overhead, as turkey vultures and kestrel hawks were eyeing him. He was paying close attention to the dangers in the sky when wham! A paw came down on him. Everything went dark. It was Soren. The coyote was waiting for a snack like Mitt to come along. He held Mitt to the ground, but this time Mitt fought back. He squirmed and he wriggled and he nipped at Soren's paw, causing the coyote to yelp and lift his paw just enough for Mitt to escape. So that explains this illustration, doesn't it? So he nipped at him so that he could escape. But this did only one thing. It made Soren very, very angry. Soren began to chase Mitt as Mitt tried very hard to lose that lean coyote. The mouse dashed forward while Soren was only steps behind. With every step he seemed to be getting closer. Mitt thought it was the end. Meanwhile, Minn was trying very hard to find a way out of the cage that had been made for her. She was so sad about losing Mitt that she didn't eat and she didn't move around very much. The next morning she heard the father say, "I think this mouse is sick and I should take him to see Dr. Johnston." Minn didn't move. The father went on, "The mouse isn't eating or drinking and it barely moves. We better find out what is wrong and help her." Within moments, the father was lifting the makeshift cage into his arms and carrying it toward the bus stop. Although Minn had no idea what was happening, she did know one thing. She had to think fast. This was her chance. At that same time, Mitt was still trying to outrun Soren. A large bird swooped down, grasping Mitt in its bill and heading upward. Mitt had no idea what sort of bird it was, as it all happened so fast. When he got his bearings about him, he saw it was a greater sandhill crane. It was an old crane, yet it seemed strong and willing. Mitt found something familiar in the crane's face. "I'm Trula. I'm Tule's sister," the crane told Mitt in the way that cranes will tell such things. "Long ago, your friend Tule asked me to keep watch over you, and I have. It seemed you have been doing well taking care of yourself. That is, until now. If you remember, Tule is from Wisconsin Cheese Jamboree book. It's when they're trying to get to Milwaukee, to the cheese jamboree, and they need help. And they're in the Horican Marsh, and then this sandhill crane named Tule helps them out. So she has a sister named Trula that is now helping Mitt. Back to the book. Trula swooned to Mitt, telling him that life often does not flow the way we want it to. She then added, looking downward at the beautiful river, "Do not push the river. It will flow by itself." Mitt thought about that for a moment. He thought about Tule and her gentle spirit. He thought about all the other friends he had made on his journey so far. And then here is an illustration of Trula coming in and rescuing Mitt from Soren the coyote. Really cool illustration. Let me start at that last paragraph again. So he thought about all the other friends he had made on his journey so far. He thought about Minn and the deep loss he was feeling now that she was gone for good. In the small, quiet way that mice understand such things, Mitt understood what Trula was saying. Don't push the river. Let the river flow. Let the river push you. Trula didn't have to speak any further. Neither did Mitt. There, in the silence of the sky, as autumn was pushing in against them, Trula winged northward. She was off her course and flying against what nature was telling her to do in order to honor a promise to her sister. Trula was watching out for Mitt, and for her it meant carrying the little mouse to the big city. But neither of them knew that in a short time everything would change. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. So will Trula get Mitt to Chicago, where Minn is already at with that family? The adventure continues. Bye-bye.